Kia ora koutou, ngā kai whakarongo ki tēnei kōrero e pāna ki tō tātou whenua tapu, whenua Māori, me ngā mahi whānui kei runga. Tēnei he kōrero poto mai I au ki a koutou. Ko te kaupapa nui kei roto ko te mahi ngāhere, engari he tūhono hoki kei roto ki ngā mahi pāmu me ngā mahi tākaro hoki. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, I'm Doug Macredie. I'm giving a quick presentation here based on my experiences in forestry, farming, recreation and tourism. I was raised in a forestry whānau. My father was a silviculture contractor. I've worked in forestry, worked in shearing sheds. I'm a trustee on sheep and beef farms and one forestry block in Maniapoto. And I've got an extensive background really just all through in Māori land use. So I'm very honoured to be able to give this short presentation with some thoughts relative to the latest ETS proposals coming out from government, but also the other resource management changes and other legislation that we all know is floating around in this space. So in 1994, I was, you see the photo there, that's me on the bike. I was the initiator of the mountain bike track network system in the Whakarewarewa forest in Rotorua. The Whakarewarewa forest in Rotorua is 4,000 hectares of exotic trees. A large percentage of those trees were planted more than 100 years ago. In fact, 172 different species were planted actually nearly 120 years ago now, and many of those stands still exist today. So Whakarewarewa forest gives us a really good case study of what happens to a planted forest if you leave it and don't cut it down. In other words, it's a surrogate survey or a surrogate case study for a carbon forest, an exotic carbon forest if it's left in the ground. So the block you see there is a 60 to 70 year old, 65 to 70 year old radiata stand. It no longer exists, they cut it down. And the photo at the bottom there shows the thickness of the native undergrowth. So the key thrusts, one of the key thrusts in the discussions around exotic trees as a carbon forest is what happens to them in the long term. And the what I'm putting forward is that in my experience, which is about 20 years of my 35 years working has been in plantation forests, is that basically as long as you thin exotic trees, they will transition to native. And they will usually do that with no assistance, with no assisted planting. The seed source that's already in the ground under the exotics is enhanced in terms of getting propagating itself and getting underway, because the exotics provide a quick canopy, and that quick canopy snuffs out weed growth and actually creates a better environment for native to come through than if you were just planting on a bare land. So key points for this presentation are pine or other exotics. It's not only about pine, provide a high value carbon opportunity for Māori, provide the opportunity through thinning or partial felling later on to get a timber earn. Exotics provide a proven, in my opinion, a proven nurse canopy for native quick growth. And they provide recreation and tourism opportunities. So in the Whakarewarewa forest in Rotorua, my understanding is it's the highest recreation use forest in New Zealand, and it is a plantation forest, not a native forest. Scion have put out 2 reports that show that the mountain biking and other recreational activities within Whakarewarewa Forest bring in $30 to $40 million a year into the Rotorua economy. So that far surpasses the per hectare economic outputs of not just farming, but of even normal timber forestry. So tuatahi, I put forward also the idea that for Māori, the carbon forestry, the ETS opportunity is much more urgent than for non-Māori. So as we all know, Māori land is remnant, it's minimal, and it's generally locked into low return farming. Now, when I say low return, I don't mean poor performing farms. So the farm trusts that I'm a part of are actually high performing sheep and beef farms, but relative to the number of owners, it then becomes low performing. Okay, so just moving through. So with a 1,000 owner station like the ones I sit on, even a high performing sheep and beef farm can't really provide any financial or other opportunities back to the owners. All the benefits pretty much go back to the farm manager. And we all know this scenario with our Māori trusts. Because of the high value earn of exotic ETS carbon, we could multiply our financial income by 5 times for any land area that we move to carbon forestry. And whether that be in combination with farming or whether that be replacing farming altogether. We know that Māori own the lion's share of potential forestry lands, but we also know that flat dairy lands offer huge potential to rectify massive lowland deforestation loss. So carbon forestry is the first time ever, in my view, that there's a low investment opportunity that's presented to Māori trust that's actually realistic to get into and that can change the game. I believe that it's unfair and even deceptive for private landowners to imply that Māori do not support carbon forestry when it's actually the very opportunity that we desperately need. And this includes whole or significant farm conversion. For the typical Māori land trust, carbon forestry offers a breakthrough to prosperity and even greater future opportunities that no other easily accessible land use can match. This opportunity, the government needs to be guarding and facilitating this opportunity as opposed to blocking or restricting it, which the current proposals suggest. Next slide, I just want to talk briefly about the experience of Māori in forestry in the Central North Island. So we know that Māori are very adaptable. We're very adaptable in terms of land and the natural environments, coming from the oceans and islands to this land of Aotearoa with its deep forests. Then we were involved in the native forestry era. Māori excel at farming, as we know well. Māori in horticulture, particularly up in the Bay of Plenty, leaders some of the highest value horticulture operations in New Zealand. And now carbon forestry, a bit of uptake there with Māori entering into carbon forestry. And now what we are terming here today, carbon transition forestry, where the exotic trees would transition to native through natural transition and in some cases through assisted management. And so in a nutshell, our history as land managers, Māori forestry-based land use with multiple physical and experiential outputs is where we're sort of arriving. We know that Māori excel in tourism, Māori excel in conservation work and restorative forestry. So these pathways and journeys imply clearly that this is not only a monetary opportunity for Māori, it's a entrepreneurial and development opportunity for Māori. Looking at the Central North Island, forests and forestry are in the blood. Māori success in plantation forestry is clearly evident. We've got many business owners in terms of harvesting and silviculture crews. Māori excel in training and education relative to forestry. More and more Māori are taking up high roles in corporate forestry. Māori are basically the backbone of the timber processing industry. and it is the largest primary sector employer for Māori easily. So the point I'm trying to raise here is that there is a natural evolution for Māori towards carbon transition forestry and towards innovative uses of forests. Just my final slide here, some miscellaneous points relative to the discussion, relative to the MPI, MFE proposal for the changes to the ETS. I'll just go through these quickly. Native remnant. Obviously, as Māori, we recognise that any remnant of native forests is of the deepest and primary importance to us as a people. But that is not a reason to shut off the multiple opportunities also presented by pine, exotic forests and other forest systems. It's a matter of both, not either or. The taha wairua we could talk on for a long time regarding the creation stories that teach both the paipera and the traditional creation stories, where humankind are the junior and the taina of all other creations. Tāne Mahuta holding the sky and earth apart, showing the importance of trees to managing global temperature, and Tāwhiri Mātia and Tāne as brothers, showing the inseparability of air quality in forests. I also add on to that I believe that the radiata pine tree, which a lot of people look at as though it's some sort of bad tree. In fact, it is a rākau tapu that belongs to the Esselen people of Monterey, California. And if we look at the perspective that with the huge deforestation that's occurred in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that tree at least has provided a fast growth canopy and covering as a kākahu of a sort, and temporarily to cover Papatūānuku. I just want to cover another point here. The discussion around reforesting New Zealand often has things like right tree, right place. And that line is used to suggest that new forests should be put away in the back blocks on the steep country. And I understand that, but I also put forward a balanced notion that where the North Island of Aotearoa in particular has lost most of its indigenous forests is actually on the flatlands, Waiataraki Plains, and those types of areas. And so when you're talking about reforesting from an ecological point of view, it makes ecological sense to reforest where you've lost forest. So that's that take there. Also to emphasize that, in my opinion, from the Māori worldview, farming does not have a superior right to land use over any other type of land use. The mana motuhake, the rangatiratanga of each whānau and trust is what really decides the land use, not colonial idealism that farming takes precedence. Point number 4, riparian planting or underplanting of existing native is not comparable to the challenges of establishing large-scale new native forests. So what I'm saying there is that it's relatively easy to do riparian and to do small-scale native establishments from scratch. But if you want to do large-scale, I'm proposing that exotics as pioneers are likely to be the optimal approach for large-scale new forest establishment. It's a concept that warrants serious attention at the very least. Point number 5, when we look at Aotearoa and New Zealand's track record globally, we know that successive generations are becoming more and more environmentally aware, and that our track record of forest loss and bird extinction and mammal infestation is becoming more widely known. So there's an opportunity around how we innovate with forestry to actually defend against that negative story that is slowly coming to light. And finally, I want to acknowledge here biodiverse farming. There are many farmers in Aotearoa who undertake some serious forest restoration and biodiversity initiatives. And I've visited many of these farms. But the issue that I see in this space is that there's no consistency of managing that standard. So at one end of the scale, you've got farmers who do intensive planting and pest control. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got farms where the stock are just basically eating out the native bush. So more precise and thorough support is needed to lift the performance of farmers generally with their native biodiversity. And in my opinion, this falls to government, farm advisors and industry bodies. Once that type of identification of standards and support to improve standards generally occurs, recognizing of native sequestration and biodiversity on farm could occur relative to those defined standards. So my final, just in summarizing the picture there shows is a reasonably good picture of native pushing its way through pine. There's far better examples out there, but but my final slide, Puao Te Ata Tu Tihei Mauri Ora, a new dawn breaks and life breathes forth. The garment wears New Zealanders now weave to recloak Papa Tuanuku will take cooperation, humility and readiness to embrace change from all sectors. We should be seeking forests collectively, using pine to native transition as one of the tools. Understand that this is a game changer for Māori trusts. Understand that there's commercial, recreation and tourism opportunities that come from increased forests, and understand that Māori are natural in the employment space for forestry. Our global image, our exotic trees mean that you don't have to harvest natives. Exotic trees can nurse natives. Exotic trees clean the air fast, and exotic trees can bridge to Indigenous cultural restoration. Kua mutu taku kōrero, kia ora tātou.